Well, I'm presuming that by now you have seen the brand new trailer for the Thousand Year Blood War Arc's anime adaptation, hopefully multiple times over. And if you haven't yet seen my live reaction to the trailer, go and watch that and then join us back here as we're now going to do a deep dive analysis into the trailer itself. Just like last time, we'll be poring over the little details, picking the trailer apart frame by frame, shot by shot, to see if we can glean any information on the brand new scenes, as well as see how else they're adapting the rest of the material for the screen. Now, I do love live reacting. It's honestly a lot of fun, but for me, this is my favourite part, taking the trailer and really breaking it down to see what hidden details there actually are, as well as the exciting new stuff as well that's really going to whet fans' appetites. Of course, there will be spoilers for the Thousand Year Blood War arc in this video, as we will be looking at this trailer from the perspective of someone who has already read the manga in its entirety. And before we get started on the video, if you are brand new here, make sure to hit subscribe for more Bleach videos like this in the future. We're so close to 150,000 subscribers now, which is absolutely crazy. And if you want to help push us to that next milestone, it would be greatly appreciated. And also, if you do like the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. I really would appreciate that as well. And if you want to take that support from me another step further, we do have a Patreon for the channel too, where you can get videos like this one early and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. To everyone who is supporting me there over on Patreon, I really do appreciate it. It means so much to me. Thank you all so very much. So before we begin breaking down the trailer piece by piece, I think it's important to look at the context of the trailer overall, as it's being presented as something of a complete introduction to the Thousand Year Blood War arc. It seems to be taking content specifically from chapters 480 through to about 502, and explicitly nothing beyond that, which I think obviously makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, the trailer feels like it's giving a fair amount away regarding the context of how this arc begins, or maybe that's just because I know the arc inside and out. But it does feel like we're seeing an awful lot of how this arc gets going, and the most important plot threads that all come together to really kickstart the biggest conflicts. But at the same time, that's really exciting for fans like us who already know the story and how it plays out. So to begin with, the very first shot in this trailer is fittingly from the very first panel, the first page of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, chapter 480, where the members of Squad 12, the Research and Development Division, are beginning to freak out because hollows are disappearing, are being killed en masse, and it's affecting the balance of the world. And it makes total sense that they're setting up the story here in this trailer, so they begin with the very beginning. And basically all of this opening is that moment. Akon talks to Mayuri, we get a nice shot of Mayuri in his brand new design, all except for one frame, which actually seems a little out of place because it's not a part of this opening chapter. And that frame is, of course, the really awesome looking shot of that monitor depicting all of those massacred Shinigami outside one of the gates to Seirete. Of course, you'll remember that that shot is not from chapter 480, but actually a little bit later on, when Akon gives his report about the first Quincy incursion into Soul Society. These Shinigami were all attacked and killed by Driscoll Bursey, and this was the attack that resulted in the death of Chojuro Sasakibe. So it's kind of weird to me that this trailer opens almost exclusively with that moment from the start of 480, but they slip that scene in there as well, showcasing the absolute butchering of members of the 1st Division. So while we start out on chapter 480, that moment is from 485, and I have to say as well that the gore on show here with how these Shinigami have been completely eviscerated should hopefully waylay any fears regarding censorship for this arc, and there are a few more moments later on as well that show that the Thousand Year Blood War seems to be being adapted in a mature way that really respects the darker tone that this arc actually had. There's a brand new close-up shot of Eburn Asgiaro lifting his hand. We can see that his Quincy cross is dangling from his wrist. This was not in the manga itself. The only moment we got of Eburn right here was a distant shot of him on top of a building as he breaks his Quincy hollow bait to summon massive hollows into the area. So it seems to me like they are just getting it out of the way that he has a Quincy cross already. That wasn't revealed to us in the manga itself until he battled Ichigo a little bit later on. So it seems to me like the secret is out, effectively. Like, at this point, people know, I would imagine, that Quincy's are the villains for the final arc of Bleach, whereas when we went into it in the weekly manga, we had a pretty big inkling that was going to be the case, but we didn't know for sure until it was outright confirmed. So it's interesting to kind of get that out of the way in this trailer. But then after that, we do get that kind of further away, wider shot of Asgiaro on the top of the building, breaking the Quincy holobay, which is really cool. And everything just looks so amazing and so atmospheric. We're then actually treated to a few shots of the Rancor in Hueco Mundo, and it's showing us this seriously dire state of things. There we see a bunch of hollows in chains being marched in a line, and a few other Rancor dead on the floor, surrounded by this blue flame. And I think these couple of shots may actually be in the present day when Ichigo would arrive later on with Urahara and the rest, and we do get that view of Hueco Mundo and how it has been subjugated. Then we get a sort of conceptual shot of a hand reaching out of the darkness to grab what looks like a Quincy cross. And I think this probably is conceptual because this is only an assumption on my part, but this looks a little out of place, so I'm wondering if this is from Hidetomo Kajimaru's description of the Quincy, which felt like it was for us as readers as much as it was for the Shinigami around him in chapter 492. But we then get our first really exciting moment of the trailer as we get a totally brand new scene featuring Yuha Bark floating godlike above a bunch of Quincy, his hands erupting with blue light, and it's a pretty terrifying moment. Now, I think that this is showcasing the invasion of Hueco Mundo, where Yuha Bark defeats Harabel single-handedly and conquers the Hollow World. The reason I say this is a couple of reasons. One, it kind of looks like sand is being kicked up all over the place, but more importantly, beneath Yuha Bark, almost sort of silhouetted, are a bunch of Quincy, but they seem to be wielding the standards of the Yagdame, or the hunting army that Yuha Bark sends to Hueco Mundo. So, in my opinion, this is that moment that I actually said I wanted to see in a relatively recent video, so that's honestly really exciting. It'd be really cool if we do actually see Yuha Bark taking down Harabel himself. That being said, I don't think we will see a sort of present-day version of this. I think Yuha Bark will have already taken Hueco Mundo just like he does in the manga itself, and then when Pesce is describing what happened to Hueco Mundo, that's when we will see this moment. The reason I think that is because there's like a flickering film grain effect going on, which tells me this is being relayed to somebody else in a sort of flashback form. But I could be looking way too far into that, but that's kind of the whole point of this video. After this, we get some really nice aesthetic looking shots of Karakura Town at night as we follow Yuki Ryunosuke, the new Shinigami, kind of taking over from Kurumadani Zenosuke as the kind of person looking after Karakura Town, effectively. And as if to herald the return of Shiro Sagisu, the decorated composer for Bleach's anime in the past, there is a wonderful remix of On the Precipice of Defeat playing throughout a lot of this trailer, which is so awesome to hear. It's so nostalgic, but at the same time does something new with this remix. It makes it a little more epic, it makes it a little more orchestral, and I think that just sets the stage perfectly for a new era of Bleach, while paying tribute to what came before. And there's also a new track, I think, a little bit later on as well, which sounds fantastic as well. But again, this is all new stuff. In that initial chapter of 480, we get a conversation between Yuki and his friend Shino, who are now sent to Karakura to carry out their duties, and the moment they stop talking, Yuki is attacked by a massive hollow, but here we see that he is spending some time walking around Karakura, getting a feel for the place, feeling nervous and scared, and I like that. They're doing some scene dressing, some scene setting, and that works really well. Again, though, I think they've just captured something really darkly cool about this whole scene, and all of this trailer feels that way. The hollows look genuinely frightening for once, like they look really imposing, which I think is awesome, and just handled so very well. But effectively, like I said, this trailer is giving a decent chunk away, although truncated. We've effectively at this point seen almost all of chapter 480. And I think now is a good time to interject as well and say that I think the art direction is fantastic. It really feels like they are trying to stick as closely to Kubo's original vision as possible, and that extends to the actual art style and how the characters are drawn. This looks like some of the closest art to Kubo's own drawings that we have really ever seen in the anime, and I think that is so awesome. If they can maintain that for the entirety of the anime, which we'll talk about at the end of this video, we're in for a real treat. When the gigantic hollow is killed by Ichigo's now gold Getsuga Tensho, which is something we mentioned in the last trailer analysis, it's now closer to its original depiction in the manga. Although actually, Ichigo kills this hollow with a Getsuga in the trailer, but in the story itself, I thought he just slashed it with his blade, and he actually kills two of them in the manga at the same time, as opposed to seemingly just one here. But this whole scene with Ichigo's introduction and his friends seems to have actually been changed up a little bit, which is something we'll dive into later as well. But anyway, when Ichigo kills this hollow with the Getsuga Tensho, you can see it frame by frame that it looks incredible the whole time. And there's also just loads of blood as this thing is sliced in two. Again, there should be no fears about how dark and mature this series is going to be. So when I said this opening scene with Ichigo and his friends is being handled slightly differently, that's because it looks as though Ichigo is going to be introduced here at basically the exact same time as Orihime, Chad, and Uryu, which does not happen in the manga. In the manga, Ichigo is the only one to be introduced, and then their involvement is showcased through a flashback. But here, Ichigo announces himself and says that he is the substitute Shinigami at the same time as we see him standing with all of his friends, and I'm presuming that's all synced up. It looked right to me anyway, but I guess that could be slightly later on, perhaps. The next part of the trailer is essentially just a sort of quick succession of a few clips of Ichigo's friends, namely introducing Orihime properly as she opens the door to his bedroom with her bread, and Uryu as well, mostly from chapters 481 and 82, as they discuss Ebon as Gyaro's arrival. The little introspective moment from Uryu is either totally new, or it's a slight swap around of a moment that happens in the story itself, so there is never a scene really that lingers on Uryu where he looks kind of pensively, presumably at Ebon, thinking maybe this guy looks a little bit like a Quincy or something, despite the Urankar mask. And then he says in the trailer, you know, be careful, Kurosaki, and that doesn't really happen in the story, but there is a moment after Ichigo has left where he remembers Uryu's parting words to him, which I wonder if that is supposed to be this moment. The next scenes then all move quite quickly, but they seem to be setting up the next major plot beat, which is the invasion of Waco Mundo. And in fact, you get the really funny moment where Nell falls from the sky onto Ichigo. There's a nice detail here where you can actually see the Garganta in the air that she comes through, which you actually can't in the manga itself. But also the voiceover here is the moment where Nell asks Ichigo to save Waco Mundo, or basically tells him that Waco Mundo is in serious trouble. And I love it in the anime. It sounds really good. It's really impactful. You can actually feel the terror in her voice, and for a moment she's no longer the kind of comic relief anymore. It's actually a really serious and dire sounding part of the story, which I absolutely love. The shot of Pesce seemingly bowing down to Ichigo in his bedroom is brand new. Presumably that's either Pesce asking Ichigo to save Dondachaka, or him being grateful when Ichigo and the others decide to do so. And of course they kind of cap off this first bit with our first proper look at Tia Harabel, now a captive of the Vandenreich, as Yhwach removes the cloth, the curtain from in front of her, revealing her in her captured state. Of course the big question here is this going to be her only scene in the anime, since it is her only scene in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, or will they extend her role somehow later on? That's really only speculation for now, but I mean, I'm hoping that they do extend it at least a little bit. This next shot of everybody gathered in Ichigo's bedroom seems to be new, but it's taken from the moment they find out about Chojuro Sasakibe's death, as we can see Yuki is on his phone, and Ichigo is in his Shinigami outfit, so he's already fought Ebon at this point. But crucially, effectively every single shot so far is from the first 6 chapters of the arc, which is honestly really crazy, and there's so much good stuff yet to go over. Next, we get a wonderful little introductory montage of Sternritter J, the jail Kirige OP. We hear his voice for the first time, and he sounds absolutely amazing, pompous, and yet somewhat intimidating, which I really do like. I think it works absolutely brilliantly for this character, and I know he's going to be so much fun in the anime itself. There's a mixture of moments here that I'm sure you recognise from both his fight with Ichigo when he pushes his glasses up talking about Uryu Ishida, and of course when he's stabbing the Urankar early on into his introduction. There is a brand new moment here that shows Kirige darting and dodging to avoid a sword strike. And I wasn't sure at first if this was Ichigo fighting him or maybe someone like Loli and Menoli or one of the Tre Bestia, because it seems like they're going to be extending pretty much any and every fight in the arc, which is awesome. But I eventually came to the conclusion that I think this is Ichigo. It looks like Zangetsu, the tip of Zangetsu's blade, but more importantly, it seems to transition into that moment where Kirige throws open his arms and he says, you know, you've been designated as a special war potential, the most powerful of all, and his lackeys kind of come out behind him and try and attack Ichigo. So I think what we're getting here is we get a moment where presumably Ichigo arrives on the scene, we get that shot as well, then he probably tries to attack Kirige or something, at which point Kirige dodges his attacks and then summons the other Quincy to attack Ichigo. That seems to be what's happening, but again, I'm only speculating based on what I can see. And then the next few shots take us back a few chapters to Ichigo versus Eburn, which is actually where we find out that they are Quincy for the very first time. We see Ichigo, you know, shocked and surprised that Eburn has that Quincy cross, and then he summons his massive, unwieldy bow. Now, I wasn't sure at first in those initial 2 trailers about how I felt regarding the sparkly blue effect that's now being used for Quincy abilities, but I'm actually really coming around to it, and I think it gives them a sort of more special feeling, and it does actually look pretty cool. And I have to give props as well, Eburn looks and sounds amazing for a character with such little screen time. We're then treated to a voiceover by Kisuke Urahara, which is him talking to Ichigo on their way into Wako Mundo. At the same time, we're now treated to some shots of Soul Society. We get a couple of shots of Ikkaku and Yumachika scouring the Rue Kongai to learn more about the disappearance of some of its residents, and we get a nice shot of Rangiku, which seems to be a bit random, and I think actually is probably new as well, as I think it's her looking up at one of the blue pillars of flame. And actually, we'll get a few more prominent Shinigami in the exact same position later on in this trailer. We then get a shot that I'm a little surprised is actually in the trailer, but I guess maybe they figured that Sasakibe's really not that important of a character, so they can show this to really set the stage for how dangerous this enemy is. But we get to see the moment Sasakibe is thrown into Yamamoto's office by Driscoll's lance and pinned into the wall. It's an amazing moment, and I think maybe, just from this very brief part we see here, I think it perhaps packs more of an impactful punch in the manga, but I love the atmosphere of the shot in the anime, the way Yamamoto's office looks very kind of shadowy and sinister, and then the brilliance of the Quincy blue really helps to stand out. A nice little detail as well is the decapitated Shinigami on the floor. This is in the manga. The Shinigami is giving a report to Yamamoto before being killed from behind by these Vandenreich invaders as they come to declare war on the Soul Society. But again, it's just cool, and another sign that censorship is absolutely not happening here whatsoever. And talking of Sasakibe and Rangiku earlier on, I just want to point out as well that it seems like with this newest adaptation, they are being more faithful to Kubo's work than ever before, right down to the individual character designs. Rangiku now has her correct blonde hair, and Sasakibe now has his correct blind blank eyes, as opposed to having pupils like he did originally. So those smaller details are so lovely to see. Also, Sasakibe does nothing but die in this arc. So are these headshots of his from all new scenes? Food for thought. We then get a shot of Kisuke turning around, which is him noticing the start of the invasion, and then we see Ichigo and Nell continuing to travel across Wako Mundo. And up next is another fantastically exciting moment this trailer is dropping us, and I think it is here with a real purpose. And this is our first totally brand new story beat. Now, I didn't think we were going to get too many of these, but this is promising, I would say. And it's a brand new scene featuring Uryu and, crucially, his father, Ryuken Ishida. Considering the Ishidas have been our really only focal point of the Quincy for the entire story of Bleach so far, it was, I think, fair enough that one of the biggest criticisms of the final arc was that we didn't spend anywhere near enough time with these characters. Nowhere near enough time was given to the Ishida storyline. So to see this is very, very promising indeed, and I'm really, really excited to see where they take and where they extend Uryu's subplot. Uryu appears to be looking at his Quincy cross rather solemnly, perhaps in my opinion wondering if it's really the Quincy that are behind everything that's going on, and then in another scene where he's wearing different clothes, so presumably not the exact same time, he seems to be confronting his father Ryuken, saying, you know, did you really know everything what was going on? And Ryuken, as normal, coldly tells him that it's got nothing to do with him. Presumably Ryuken trying to keep Uryu out of harm's way while believing that dealing with Yhwach is something that only belongs to Ryuken because it was his wife that was murdered, but of course eventually he comes around to letting Uryu help out. But I'm so intrigued. I'm so intrigued. I mean, first of all, it's so good that Ryuken will get more time to shine. But also, I do wonder if this moment will influence perspectives on how people feel about Uryu when he turns up as a quote-unquote traitor later on, because that moment was a out-of-nowhere crazy moment for many of us. Now, I think a lot of us suspected that Uryu would be involved in the Vandenreich in some way, especially since he wasn't seen for multiple chapters after his original introduction in this arc. But because we had no insight into his initial planning or his mental state or anything like that, we could only hazard guesses as to whose side he was really on. But if we actually see him forming opinions of the Vandenreich early on and see him actively wanting to do something about it early on, it might lessen the impact of that somewhat, as it might make it more obvious that he's not a bad guy, but I mean, maybe that's just what they're trying to do anyway. Regardless, I'm so intrigued to see how this scene plays out. Next up, we see Yamamoto and the captains preparing for their meeting in chapter 488, and then we get a wonderful shot, this massive, expansive overhead shot of Seirete as Yhwach appears and looks down upon them all, and that's the precursor to the first invasion itself. Presumably this is just before his appearance in chapter 493, but it could also be the origin of the overhead foot shot from the end of chapter 490. We then get one of my probably favourite parts of the trailer, of course, where we get a voiceover from none other than Ugram Hashwoth himself. I think our first Sternritter voice, I believe, obviously if you don't count Brave Souls. But then we get to see our first real introduction to chapter 494, which, let's face it, is one of the most exciting chapters in this early spate of the 1,000-Year Blood War, and we get to see some Sternritter up close and personal, including, first and foremost, none other than my boy Askin Naklavar, only appearing very briefly, but now casting away any doubt whatsoever that he was the Sternritter who appeared in that initial splash page in 494. Obviously, that became more obvious as the arc progressed, but it's really cool to see them making it overtly clear it's him. He's then followed up by Robert Akutrone, Asnot, Bambietta Bastabine, and Basby. Bambietta, by the way, I mean, they all look great, but I think Bambietta looks so good. Her image just looks exactly like it does in the manga itself. The only Sternritter to appear initially in these splash pages in the manga who doesn't appear in the trailer here is Sternritter O the Overkill Driscoll Bursey. And now that we can see a little bit more of this moment, it does look like Basby is throwing off his hood here, so presumably this is after he has attacked Kira and killed the heads of the 3rd Division. The next shot of Ichigo in Bankai in Karakura Town is a difficult one that I'm having trouble placing. The voiceover is not from this scene, this is him talking about rescuing the Urankar back in his bedroom. So, what is this moment? Because Ichigo never uses Bankai extensively in Karakura Town in this arc. He uses it very briefly against Eburn, but again, that doesn't seem to be this moment. The reason I don't think it's the fight against Eburn is because Ichigo is turning to face the screen with like a smile on his face. It doesn't look like he's in any kind of real danger or a battle or anything like that, so I'd be surprised if it was the Eburn fight, which means it could be the battle against the Hollows in chapter 481 and 480, but I'd be really surprised if Ichigo needed to use Bankai against them, but they might just be making him do it anyway. And again, the next shot was one that was slightly difficult to place, but I'm pretty sure it's actually Ichigo about to use Bankai against Eburn in their initial fight, as we then get a follow-up almost directly to this scene a bit later on where Ichigo does shout Bankai. So it does seem to be that moment where Eburn kind of goads him into using it and then tries to steal it. Continuing the battle against Eburn, we see Ichigo slicing through one of his energy orbs, which does actually happen in the manga but from a slightly different angle, and then after this we get a kind of mixture of Ichigo saying Bankai in 2 different appearances. The second part of that of Bankai is the one I mentioned a minute ago with him using it against Eburn, which means the first part is either this unknown scene where he turns to face the viewer, or it could be against Kirige Opi because him saying Bankai happens off-screen in that fight. So it could be that, but I'm more inclined to say that this moment is connected to that first part that we can't quite place. And then something happens later on which I think connects to this as well, so we'll get there in a bit. Our new opening song, Scar by Tatsuya Kitani, begins to play. I really do like it, it's catchy. I'm going to spend some time getting to listen to it obviously a bit more when it's properly released, But for now, I think it's going to enter the halls of the rest of Bleach's great opening songs. And here we get some very fast cuts, some very flashy cuts of Ichigo fighting Kyuuge Opie. Kyuuge is in his transformed, ion-absorbed state, and we did actually get a glimpse of this fight in the last trailer as well. But this part is a little bit later on into the fight where Kyuuge is getting fully overwhelmed by Ichigo now. Ichigo's Reiatsu looks really weird here, but I think it might just be a stylistic thing. It's possible they've changed up how his Reiatsu looks in Bankai. And obviously Ichigo's not really using Bankai a whole lot in this arc, so maybe it's just for these moments, but I thought it was worth pointing out because on this freeze frame, for instance, it does look really strange, almost in some places reminiscent of his hollow mask. Now this next shot is a very interesting one, as again I think they are slightly changing up how some things happen in the manga itself. We see Bazz-B leaning over with his hood up and his finger outstretched as though he's just fired Burner Finger 1, but of course this is not how this moment plays out in the manga itself. In the manga, Izuru is blasted by Bazz-B from within the Pillar of Flame before they can even properly see him, and then Bazz-B emerges from the pillar, kills the 5th and the 6th seat of the 3rd Division with his hood still up, then takes out the 3rd seat, then removes his hood. Now there are a couple of things I think could be happening here. It's possible that Izuru is still shot from within the Pillar of Flame itself, and then it disperses around Bazz-B, leaving him doing this pose that we see here, and then he goes on to attack the other members of the 3rd Division and everything kind of plays out like normal. Or something slightly different is the whole scene plays out like normal, and then before he removes his hood, Bazz-B fires Burner Fingers at the fleeing Shinigami. Either one of those could be the case. From the way Bazz-B moves his arm in this brief shot, it looks like he's about to use Burner Finger, so I might even be more inclined to say the second example is more likely. But either way, they are slightly changing up the way this moment happens. We then get a shot of Kira as he is blasted by Bazz-B, and then it's back to the captain's meeting. And now I'm probably really nitpicking here, but again, that is the point of this video. But we see Yamamoto slamming his cane down on the floor. And I'm hoping they haven't lost the feel of this scene, because there is a shot in the initial story that Yamamoto isn't slamming his cane on the floor like he normally does when he issues an order, and that's supposed to be a big deal. He's supposed to be not himself. He's grieving, he's mourning, and so because of that, he is like a changed man. Like, you can imagine him standing there, like, gripping his cane, teetering on the edge as he's just, like, suddenly barks this order without actually slamming his cane down on the ground in his normal fashion. So if he... Maybe this is not that scene, maybe this is another part later or earlier in the meeting, but I hope they don't change that, because I thought it was a really cool moment for a bit of insight into Yamamoto's mind at that time. There's then a couple of shots of the captains. We see Kyoraku on the battlefield, we see Ukitake, Rose, and Kensei in the captain's meeting, all of whom look absolutely incredible. The next shot of Mayuri with him up against the wall seems to be when he's talking to Yamamoto about sacrificing the Rukongai residents to stabilize the balance of the worlds. And I have to say, with the way the color grading is, it looks amazing, but there's an awful lot of shots at the golden hour here, making the entire of Seirete look like it is constantly bathed in sunset. But it does look pretty awesome though, to be fair. We then get the shot of Eburn activating his Bankai stealing medallion. They've actually chosen to keep that initial design that looks totally different to when the Sternritter use it, and I actually really like that, because that always implied to me that it didn't react well to Eburn using it because he's not a proper Quincy, but at the same time it looks fantastic. All of the animation, by the way, is so fluid, it just looks brilliant, and I absolutely love Eburn's crazy face that he pulls here when he says that your Bankai ends here, and he looks so mad and filled with glee, because it was really weird and wild in the manga to see that. It was totally, like, unexpected. It fills up an entire page, so it's really cool to see it translated here, and I have to say again that Eburn's voice actor is just absolutely killing it for someone with so few lines. There's also a lovely amount of detail, though, going into Ichigo's Bankai gauntlet being ripped apart as Eburn tries to steal it, which I think is it just looks so good. We mentioned in our last trailer analysis that it looked like Hitsugaya was getting an extended battle sequence against Sternritter I Kang-Do during the first invasion, and that is absolutely confirmed here, as there is a wonderful shot of Kang leaping at Hitsugaya with his Wolverine claws, seemingly smashing through some ice to get to him. I really hope these shots are actually, like, in the anime. I was wondering if some of these moments were maybe just being used as part of the opening but because they're playing the music, I thought maybe they would take some of those moments from the opening and put them in here as well, but I really hope they are actually going to play out like this in the anime itself. There's also another devastating moment where Hitsugaya cries out to Hyorin Maru, and I think that's really interesting for people who don't know anything about the story. They might be wondering, like, why is Hitsugaya, like, screaming? I think thinking about this from the perspective of anime-only viewers is really kind of a fascinating exercise. We then get shots of Renji, Ikaku, Yumichika, and Rukia looking up at the blue pillars of flame, while the voiceover is everybody shouting about Ichigo coming to save them at some point in chapter 500, really kind of hammering home how dire this situation has actually become. There's an interesting shot of Genshiro Okikiba here as well, the third seat of the first division. He's clutching a Zanpakuto toe, which he never does in the manga, so that's brand new. At least I think he doesn't. I'm pretty sure he's just kneeling on the floor. This seems to be the scene where Yamamoto tells him to stay behind as he's going to go out onto the battlefield, so Okikiba needs to look after the first division. The area behind Okikiba is destroyed, and we see this exact same backdrop later when we see Yamamoto, so that lends credence to that idea, and this is obviously after Yamamoto has devastated his own office with Ryujin Jaka. I will say the overall sense of bleakness, the dreariness of the lighting, the colour, the weather, is really hammering home how unprecedentedly bad this is for the Shinigami, and I think it'll be really interesting to see if anime-only viewers can like really pick up on how bad a situation this actually is. And I'm so excited for the first invasion. In particular, I just can't wait. But then to kind of wrap this whole thing up, we see an extended sequence of the Karakura gang taking down the Hollows from chapter 480. Like I said, we do get a small flashback in the manga in 481, seeing Uryu fighting, seeing Ichigo fighting, but here in the anime we're actually getting to see Chad and Orihime join in a little bit as well, which is pretty nice. And, you know, good for their characters considering they don't do an awful lot in this story. But I think this moment in general is just going to really hype up these main characters as actually being pretty powerful now at this point in the story. This is then followed up by that final shot that I mentioned of Ichigo that I don't recognize. Look, him kind of looking up into the sky, and because of the crackling yellow Reiatsu around him, which matches up to when he shouts Ban earlier in this trailer, I think he's activating Bankai. And I reckon this is connected to that earlier scene of him turning to the camera that I don't recognise. What I think is happening here is I'm guessing Ichigo fights and kills a bunch of the Hollows, but then for some reason decides to go Bankai, and maybe turns to look at either his friends or Yuki Ryonosuke, who was nearly dead on the floor, and maybe is like reassuring him that they're going to be okay. That's what I'm thinking is going on here, but I'm not entirely sure. We then get a nice moment that's like an amalgamation of Ichigo using different Getsuga Tensho before the trailer ends, and we hear Yuha Bark's voiceover when he first appears in chapter 484. And then the trailer totally closes out with a really nice moment that like recreates a volume poem. So if they continue that somehow in the episodes itself, that would be really neat to see. Now, before we go, I want to talk briefly about the rumoured length of this arc in the anime, which is about, apparently, 50 episodes long, and I'm really not sure how I feel about that, because that doesn't sound very long to me at all. Now, obviously, there won't be any filler arcs in this, which helps explain the shortened length, but at the same time, the Thousand Year Blood War arc is over 200 chapters long, and I think traditionally, back in the day, Bleach episodes used to adapt generally 2 to 3 chapters per episode. And so even there, you would presumably be expecting around 80 episodes, maybe 100 if they're feeling really generous. But also, they're supposed to be adding new scenes and extending virtually all the fights. And it seems like we've seen a lot of that already. So I just have a really difficult time imagining how they fit all of the Thousand Year Blood War arc plus extensions into only 50 episodes. Regardless, either way, we're going to have to wait and see, I think, really, as to what comes of this, but so far, I'm not seeing anything that really makes me worry at all about the pacing or the quality of this anime adaptation. I'm very, very excited and very pleased and reassured by what I've seen so far. I just thought it was worth bringing up and saying that I personally would have expected more episodes than 50 for an arc of this length, especially with extensions being presumably added to it. So we're just going to have to see what they do, I guess. For all intents and purposes, that is it for our deep dive into this trailer. I really hope you enjoyed it. I think I got everything. I think it was pretty comprehensive, but do please let me know if I missed anything or if you think you have a different idea on what some of these scenes might be. Do please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts on the trailer as well. What did you think of the trailer, and how much are you looking forward to the 1000 Year Blood War Arcs anime? I know that I can't wait for October 10th. Alright guys, but that's it for the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit subscribe, push us to 150,000, and if you really like the video, give it a thumbs up as well. Until next time guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.